5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome back to Lessons and Blessings. It's our second episode of the year.
Yeah, I think so.
Technically, it's our second. We dropped. This will be our third drop.
True.
But this is our second recorded. We had some things happen at the end of the year. We're supposed to drop the recap last year, not in 2024. But
happens.
It hit who it needed to hit.
That's right.
That's all that matters. But today, we have a very special guest. I'm not talking about AJ. No, he's very special indeed. We know that.
Uh-huh.
But we have his other, better half in the building, Whitney Tabor.
The applause is crazy.
Hello.
I got a soundboard now, y'all.
Shell's got a soundboard. He's excited.
Oh,
I am. Well, Whitney, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How's
Honored.
it feel to be here right now?
It's exciting. I'm excited. I'm ready to see what's gonna unfold. Excited to see the questions, and yeah, pumped to be a part of it.
Be the first guest
Facts.
since we've been doing this together.
Facts.
First female
Does
ever
that-
on the podcast.
Do you feel like that puts on a lot of pressure on you, or?
Nah.
All right.
I'm ready.
Bold.
Born
I
ready.
like it.
You know what I
Alright.
find funny though? I asked her, how does she feel to be here? We're in her house.
That is a good point.
How
We
to
are
feel to be
filming
here at your own kitchen table.
at
That's
our
great.
dinner table.
But very homey here. Very homey.
It's my house.
I like the ambiance.
Well, today, guys, we have a special episode for y'all. Today, we're talking about marriage.
Marriage.
And I'm not qualified to talk about that. AJ is qualified to talk about it, but why would he talk about that without his spouse? That does not make any sense.
Yeah.
It's like marriage. You do everything together.
Fact.
We'll talk about
We're
it.
talking about it maybe. And so this would be more of a Q&A style question episode, because we reached out to some friends, and shout out to everybody that sent questions in.
Yeah.
Disclaimer, all y'all questions are getting answered. But if yours gets answered, we appreciate you, and I hope the question hits you. Boom, just like that. All
And
right.
if yours doesn't get answered, we still appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Lots
thank
of
you.
good questions.
Thank you.
Maybe just a little
Absolutely.
less, but
All right, to get this thing just kicked off real quick, Whitney, like, you got 48 seconds.
oh my gosh.
Okay.
Tell us a little about yourself.
Okay. I am a first-year teacher. I teach third grade. Stop looking at your watch, Sheldon. I teach third grade science and social studies, and I love it. It is crazy, but it is good. I also volunteer at our local church in our young adults, and also doing worship on Sundays sometimes when I'm lucky enough. And grew up in a small town, met
fake
AJ
town,
at college. It's not fake.
not real.
It's very tiny, but it's actually growing, which makes me sad. But yes, so a little bit about me. I'm also an aunt to 3 now. Just
Yeah,
new
recent.
niece
Ooh.
just dropped.
Okay.
New niece
just dropped this
Just dropped.
crazy update.
Literally.
24.
No, 2023. She finished up the year for us. So now we have 3,
Yeah.
2 nephews and a niece, and we love them dearly, and they're wild. But yep.
Yeah.
And we have a bunny named Wiggles.
We do
I don't
have
know
a
if they
bunny
know
named
that
Wiggles.
yet, but
I think we
Wiggle,
probably
wiggle.
have talked about it
she's
before.
perfect in every way.
She is great.
So
Well, how long did... I guess we have to give our qualifications a little bit. We've been married for 3 years.
3 years now.
Got married during the pandemic in 2020.
It was
Not the
wild.
Panda Express,
Wild
that's
time.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And had
but
been
before that,
together-
we dated for like 4.5.
4 and a half.
Yeah.
So we've been together now for a grand total. Quick math.
7.5 years.
Wow.
Quick math.
It's true.
Long time.
Applause.
Don't
Quick
do
math on that.
That's crazy.
I am a
That's a
teacher.
third grade teacher.
I am a teacher. That's my baby. Your kids are in good hands.
I had to. That's awesome. So to get this thing kicked off, now some of these questions some of them are heavy, and some are on the lighter side. So just to kind of give everybody what they're getting into is, how did y'all meet, and who was attracted to who first?
Okay. Well, we met at college. That's an easy one. We both went to formerly known as Houston Baptist University. Now it's changed its name, which is lame, but whatever. And we met there as freshmen. I actually was trying to find AJ for a total of like 3 days because I saw him with a hat on of a band that I had been to their concert. But AJ thought he was quite literally too cool for school, and he hid in his dorm room for all of honors orientation.
That makes so much sense.
We were both in honors college because we're both nerds. And he hid in his dorm room, and so I couldn't find him. And the whole time I was like, dude, where is that guy with that hat? And everyone was like, who are you talking about?
Not real.
And I was like, no, I know I saw him. And they're like, who are you talking about? Turns out it's AJ. I met him in we had a freshman year seminar
FYS,
class
yep.
together. And yeah, we started out the semester sitting with one of our friends, our mutual friends in between us. And like a couple months after that, we started dating, and our friend quickly moved aside, you know?
Well, so shout out to Cody Ward, who is married now and
has a baby.
Has a kid, which is crazy.
It's crazy that
I
our
think
friends
you had
have
met
babies.
him before. You were a cheerleader.
I was a cheerleader.
And so you had met him before. He was very involved with student activities and those things. And then he was in our quad that I lived in. So FYS, he's sitting in between us. I know Cody. She knows Cody. So he's in the middle. And then the second day, we're sitting next to each other. So, I mean, it took one session. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I think we're going to sit next to each other now. But yeah, I still think it wasn't. I think it was a sweater that I wore that had the Capital Kings. We've had this conversation for many years.
It was a hat. It was a green hat.
I know. It was a lime green hat.
Yes,
but I never had a lime green hat from Capital Kings.
I love when he tells me I'm right.
I've never had a lime green hat of that. I remember
number one
it
for
was
marriage.
it was the summer that we had a bunch of kids camps, and so it was probably one of those like Camp Encounter or one of those things, or 4 or 5. But listen, I like hats. I have a lot of hats.
You're wearing a hat right now.
I am wearing a hat right now.
I
And
got
this
you
is a
that
great
hat.
hat.
And it's mint.
It's a good hat.
I did buy you the hat.
Don't think I've ever had a hat from them. I was also very stingy with like buying merch. Some of that was given to me, so I get it. But
anyways.
so yeah, we those boys, if you're taking notes, is what we call drive-by Riz. You've got to.
Oh my.
Wait, hold on. Say it again.
Drive-by Riz, and basically, let me break it down for you for a second. Girls like a little bit of mystery. Okay, so
False.
if you show up in a place and then you just disappear for a little bit, was that a guy? An angel, maybe.
No.
Where is he?
Oh.
What's it about?
Okay.
Does he think he's better than us?
Wow.
I got to go find out what this guy.
Okay,
No.
boys, these are tips I'm guessing on what boys want in a girl, because this is not what happened.
No, but
not,
it was.
not what we're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, honors college is a funny place to be. A lot of homeschool kids.
Very odd place.
And it was great. So there's a reason I wasn't at all those things. But
yeah, we met, and then we just had like a big friend group that we were both kind of in. And hung out with a lot, and I feel like probably a couple weeks into like actually hanging out, we were kind of like, hold up, wait a second.
Well, without giving away any names, there was my roommate at the time had been linked romantically to Whitney, and he was very interested, and Whitney was not interested, and so for a long time, all of the like heat was about them. That's all they talked. They'd always mess with my roommate about it, and oh my goodness, all this kind of stuff.
And I had no clue. I mean, I knew that he kind of like liked me, but I didn't know they were like messing with him and stuff, and that like everyone knew. But he turned out to be one of my best friends in college. Love the guy, just not like that, you know. But yeah, they were all focused on that, I guess, and then
just under the radar
the whole time.
Just
Me and
hanging
AJ
out.
were kind of starting to.
Yeah, because I think we started
hang out
date
more.
probably at the end of October, so it would have been like a couple months at that time. So yeah, we were just hanging out with each other a lot of times. So I think from the story, Whitney was probably the first to be attracted.
Oh yeah, I don't really remember.
At this time, I had sworn off relationships for a year, and I made it 2 months.
We actually both had.
Funny enough.
Yes, we both went into college with the expectation I'm not dating. I was just done with males in general because, you know,
Me too.
high school boys, am I right? And so I came into college and I was like, absolutely not. I will avoid them at all costs. I'm not dating anyone. And literally the Lord, like after meeting AJ, I knew that I was like interested and I had feelings for him, but I was like, I'm still not going to date him. Like I told myself I wasn't. And so like, I want to stick to that. And like, also in the back of my head, I was like, Lord, I'm doing it for you. Just so that like, I wouldn't have to date people. And then literally before AJ and I were even dating, we were just like hanging out a lot and I was grabbing feelings for him. And I can remember vividly that I was walking to my dorm room and I could see my front door and I was walking in this like outdoor corridor And I was praying and I was talking with the Lord, and I was like, okay, Lord, like I have these feelings, like I need you to take them away because I said that I wasn't going to date. And so I'm not going to date and blah, blah, blah. And he literally was like, you need to get on board because you're going to marry him. And I was like,
Okay. What did he say?
No, God, you're not hearing me. And he was like, no, you're not hearing me. Like, you need to get on board or I will make you get on board. Like, those are your options. Is like, you can do it willingly or we can do this the hard way, which will not be fun. And so then I was like, oh, okay. Like, I better get on board, you know? And so obviously it wasn't something that I was like, it wasn't anything towards AJ that I was like, I don't want to date him. It was just the principle of like me not wanting to be in a relationship. But once I got that, like, well, I mean, once the Lord tells you something, you kind of just
gotta go with it.
You kind of just do it, you know, that's obedience. And so we had a few conversations and started dating shortly after. So now we're here.
Yeah.
Short,
I mean, I
but long
think I had
backstory.
talked about it on one of the Get to Know Me episodes, but at that time, I think it's important to note we're not saying that everybody needs to go on a break from relationships before they find the person. I think that gets turned into a lot of messaging that's like, you'll find them when you're not looking, which I think there is maybe some truth to that. Mm-hmm. But I think the truth is that you'll find what God wants for you when you stop trying to manufacture it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for us, at least for me and my experience, a lot of my relationships prior to that was me telling God what I wanted and asking him to co-sign and do it.
Yeah.
And,
100%.
you know, I have journals where I wrote like, this is what I want. This is what I think or what I know you want. And so even literally like verbatim, if this isn't your will, change it. At 16, that makes sense to you. Now it doesn't. And there are still things that I have to, you know, continue to give to the Lord. But I think the truth in the matter is that if you're not ready to let God decide the things about your relationship, then you're probably not ready to be in a relationship because you're still in charge. But yeah, I mean, I think it moved very quickly. It really did. And I think because maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't. But as soon as they started to kind of like do that weird thing where they're looking at us differently because we hang out a lot or we're spending a lot of time with each other, like, oh my gosh, you have feelings. That's kind of when I'm like, hey, we need to figure out what's going on here because I don't need other people to weigh into what's a you and me conversation. And I don't want to put you in a position where you're having to answer questions that we haven't talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as soon as it gets that, oh my gosh, I think they're interested, blah, 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 and you start kind of getting those things back, that's immediately where I'm like, okay, let's find out what we are because I'm not going to have you go and answer what you think when there's an opportunity to be sure and be on the same page.
Yeah.
So that meant, you know, by the end of October, it was like, okay, yeah, this is what it is. And we had to make a decision, which was, hey, at this time, we both had heard God tell us we're supposed to get married. And so trying to let each other know without saying it outright is a hilarious thing to try to do.
It was such an odd
It was
time.
a wild conversation. But after that, you know, it was, okay, God said this was going to happen. That doesn't mean we have to start dating now, but we have to make a decision what path we want to take, you know, because either we wait because we're not getting married until after college and we have to endure potentially more temptation, different struggles, all that kind of stuff. Or we, you know, wait, we put a pause on this. We're just friends. We don't do anything more than that. We're not hanging out all the time and we go that path. But yeah, for us, I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of, I'm sure they're out there, but I just feel like a lot of stories that I hear aren't as like boom, boom, boom as ours was, you know, but it was fun. It was cool.
What a cool story.
Hey, thanks.
It's my fourth time hearing it. I'm just like, yeah. I remember at one point I heard your side of the story, and then I was like, hold up. I've never heard Whitney's side of the story. So then hearing her side of the story, then put it together like, you were wrong, bro.
As what?
Nah, I'm joking. You're like, huh? Like, what?
Is that what I'm
So AJ made up the whole thing.
Nah. And so, so kind of taking that timeline from where y'all were then to now, it's not on here, but it's a question that popped in my head what did y'all have to unlearn individually as y'all were like taking into that? Like, what would you say the biggest thing you had to unlearn when you were getting ready to either step into marriage, like engagement or dating, engagement, and then married, or however you want to answer that question? What did you have to unlearn?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. I think that for me, like I was saying earlier, that I had a few relationships in high school that part of them I handled poorly, and also part of them the other parties handled poorly. And because of that, like, I wouldn't say my relationships in high school were traumatic. They weren't, but there was a lot of baggage there. And so coming into dating AJ, there was just a lot. I had a lot of trouble having like healthy boundaries, honestly, and not in a way where you typically think, but like I literally wanted to be with him 24/7 and hang out, and like not in like a possessive way. Like it wasn't like you can't hang out with people. It was more just like I just want to be with you all the time. Like I didn't know how to separate that and how to like almost like be me still. And it came out of a place of like I love you and I love spending time with you and you're my best friend and I want to be together all the time. But I needed to kind of learn that healthy balance of like, hey, like I have to be my own person still. Like I can't just become consumed by the person that I'm with. And so, it was just a really big learning curve for me. And a lot of other things played into that as well that made it a lot harder, I think, for me. But that was probably one of the biggest things, I think, starting out dating that I had to unlearn.
You think, I mean, at 18, I think that's, when you're first getting out of your parents' house, should I say, is when you're really starting to evaluate yourself and how you see yourself. And so in retrospect, I think we can look back and say, yeah, you were dealing with, a lot of mental things that you weren't even breached yet. And so
I wasn't even aware of.
In retrospect, some of that is an anxious connection. And not in the way that we would classically talk about anxiety, but it's just that desire to always have that like security almost and always just be around.
Yeah. The security.
Which is huge. And for myself, it was quite the opposite. I had, and we went into detail about this on one of the other podcasts, but because of the way that, a previous relationship of mine had ended in the manner that it did, I was dead set on not losing myself in someone else. Yeah. Whereas Whitney was the literal opposite. Yeah. Whitney was like, there should be no separation. And I'm like, I have to have separation or I'm going to get hurt and lose my mind. And so I think one of the things that you have to understand is, I think there's wisdom in trying to learn from your experience. And I think there's wisdom in trying to put up boundaries that are good for yourself. But I had to understand that she's not every girl I've dated.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that's not your ex. They might make you feel like that. They might put you in situations that are similar. And
or
that
doesn't
just
mean
brings
those feelings up.
Right. And that doesn't mean that the person you're with is the person you're going to be with forever. But it's just, you have to let people be their own people and not just what happened to you. I think for me, a lot of trying to figure out was just trying to become self-aware enough to understand I was acting a certain way because I was hurt and I had to manage that and I had to deal with that. And I had to not let that, continue to dictate. Because the thing about pain is that a lot of times people aren't like, well, I'm holding these people at bay because I'm in pain. It just makes sense in their head. They're just like, oh yeah, this is what I do. And so I had to get to a point where, any relationships is you have to understand it's no longer just about what you want and what's best for you. Now you have to figure out what's best for each other and you guys together. And that's a very difficult thing to do because until you've gotten into, I think, a really healthy and committed relationship, you don't really know what it means to sacrifice in a relationship.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of my relationship up until that time, I don't think I was like a jerk, but I think a lot of it was still on how it made me feel and how excited I was and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, essentially like you have to unlearn the difference. You don't forget your pain, right? Because I think then we end up going through pain that God wants to use to shape and grow us. And then we just forgo all of that, but we can't hold people up through the lens of our pain, I think. Like I have to allow Whitney we're starting with a clean slate.
Yeah.
Right?
You have to let people make their own mistakes and not just assume that they're making the mistakes that others make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, I think we're used to internalizing a lot of things. And so one of the biggest things to get over is communication. If I think you're doing that, I have to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
I can't guess for you what you mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if I do that, it's all over.
Yeah. And then to answer the other part of your question, I think going into marriage, honestly, I feel like a big misconception is that like the jump from dating to engaged to marriage are like huge leaps, when in reality, like at least for AJ and I, because we dated for so long, it was like we were taking tiny leaps the entire time through our dating life.
Yeah.
And so like getting engaged didn't feel like this, like, oh my gosh, like now we have to do like this and this. Like, I mean, we had to wedding plan and things like that, but there wasn't anything like when we got engaged, there wasn't conversation where it's like, okay, well, before we get married, I need you to change this. It was like, no, like we are who we are. And we had worked so hard dating to be really just the best versions of ourselves that we could be. And also like just learn to communicate the best we could together, and also just be a couple that we wanted to be, like not just be like a, you know, we chose what we wanted to be, and we made sure to work hard to get to that. And so because of that, like jumping into engagement and marriage weren't there. We didn't have any prerequisites incomplete. And so it wasn't like, okay, now we're engaged, we got to get to work. Like it was like, nah, man, like we've done the work. This is the easy part now, you know? And so I don't feel like there was some big unlearning things to happen necessarily in those jumps, at least from my perspective. I don't remember any. Yeah.
I mean, I think relationships are work, and we all know that, and we can all kind of sign off on that. But I think that there's kind of a narrative and some of how I think especially in church, the way that we talk about relationships, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of married people don't take you seriously until you're married. Yeah. And so there's that step in their head. Like you might look at me different because I'm married now and like, oh, he's a husband now. But I really think that a lot of, as we kind of talk to people about marriage and stuff, and not everybody, but there were plenty of people that are like, oh, marriage, you know, there's a lot of work. It's like
almost like like yikes.
I sure about that? I believe this about so many things in life. I think you can talk about it with your own traumatic experiences and how you handle those things, but work is work. Like you gotta work. And if you punt it down, you gotta work with interest later.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what and this is what I tell to people, because I think in the Christian space too, you'll get these relationships where people have dated for 4 months and they're like, I'm ready to get married. And I'm not saying anything against those things. Like I know that there are people that we know personally that have had great relationships and they're great together that dated for 4 months. But I think it's about letting people know that there is in some level a prerequisite of difficult conversations that you have to have. Yeah. And so Whitney and I had the, I think, luxury. It wasn't always easy, but we had the time over 4.5 years to have those as we needed to. If you date for 4 months, it's like putting it in a pressure cooker, and that's got to get done now. Yeah. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Yeah.
Or, you know, a lot of people, when they don't date for very long before they get into marriage, it makes their marriage much harder. I feel like for AJ and I, we have our marriage, not that it isn't still work, because it is. Like we still have to sacrifice and like we still have to work hard to make sure that we're communicating and, you know, just staying on the same page. But we don't have like huge blow up fights and things like that. Like that doesn't happen for us. And I think a lot of it is because we worked so hard in dating. And so I think that when people don't take that time in the dating like era, then when they get to marriage, it makes those big explosions kind of happen, because those conversations now they are, you know, now they don't have even the option to run if they want to, you know, like they're stuck now. And
now
so
you're scared.
Now you feel backed into a corner. And so now you don't know that you feel completely safe with them yet. Yep. And, you know, sometimes the rush to get married ends up biting you later.
Well, it comes with what it comes with. Yeah. And we just don't explain it, I think, to people. Like, I think in a lot of ways, and I know this will sound crazy, but because of the work that we did, like just naturally, as I am naturally bent towards confrontation, which means like when we talk about fight or flight, I do not run. When it comes to emotional things, we're going to talk about it. We're going to deal with it. Whitney's laughing because that meant me being like, nope, we're doing this. And she's like, I don't want it anymore. And I'm like,
too bad.
So for me, I'm bringing that into whatever relationship I'm coming into. And if they're not going to get in the work with me, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was, hey, I can tell you're upset or I'm upset. Let's talk about that. Let's open that discussion. And I think in that way, because I was also unlearning all the things that I just talked about, trying to deal with my own boundaries with myself and pain and how do I interact with those things. If you're older than us and you've been married longer than us, like, trust me, we know that there's probably going to be very difficult years ahead. Yeah. We don't mean to say that it's like this, you just work hard beforehand and it's all great.
Right.
We haven't experienced that yet. And so we don't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
I think in my experience, though, it was easier for me. It's easier for me to be a husband than it ever was for me to be a boyfriend. And that's wild, I think, for most people. But I told Whitney a lot of the times too, is when we were dating, I was doing a million different things.
Yeah.
I mean, at the church I was involved in, every day of the week I was doing something. And so I think Whitney felt that she had to compete for my time a lot.
Yeah.
And so when we got married, I was telling her, I was like, I just really feel like when we come home to the same place, and it's just going to be so much easier. That was what was most difficult for me. And so the jump from engaged to being engaged and to being married, in a lot of ways for me personally, it felt easier.
Yeah, agreed.
It's like, oh, well, what do you mean? We're going to talk. We're going to be around each other. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's not still work, but it felt easier to me.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think, number one, we talk about things sometimes that are hard as if they were easy. And so we've walked through a lot of really hard seasons.
Oh, we paid our dues.
Yes. But the marriage has never been the part that it's like, oh, it's crumbling. Like, it's never.
So it's been something external.
Yeah, something external has been extremely hard, and it's stretched our marriage. It's made it where we are, we don't see each other as much, or we're just really on edge a lot because there's just a lot of stress happening. But it's never been the marriage that we're like, oh, this is the problem. We need to work on this because it's crumbling apart. But yeah, there have been hard times. But
yeah, it's a full circle moment somewhat to us, as I'm thinking. One of the first things we ever did for United City Young Adults was a marriage panel, which is kind of how we were like introduced to a lot of you guys. Yeah. And I had said it, and I stand by it. It's just something that I'm always going to tell people. But when it comes to people that you're looking to date, I think there are two groups of people, because everybody's imperfect, everybody is flawed.
Yeah.
I think you are going to find people who have issues or people who will be an issue.
Yeah.
And that is a very big difference that you have to find out, because that dating period with Whitney and I is trying to figure out, are you coming with baggage, or is how you interact with me, or how you're going to live your life? Is that the problem itself?
The problem, yeah.
Are we compatible? And we throw that word around a lot, but it meant I have to find out, and Whitney had to, vice versa, but I have to find out if Whitney is as committed to doing the hard work as I am. Mm-hmm. Because if we're not, then it's not going to work long term.
Yeah. And
so I think a lot of people are in relationships potentially where there is this glaring, massive issue. And it's, okay, well, you can deal with certain things. Like in our marriage, we've gone through seasons where one of us is going through a really dark place, a really dark time. Like, it's not that we have been shielded from the hardships of life.
Right.
But I think a lot of what can be said about it, and we've talked a lot about this, Sheldon, pain is in life no matter what.
Yeah.
But we also, if you look back on the years that you've lived, can point out moments where we invited more pain into our life because 100%. We were stubborn, naive, whatever it was. And so a lot of the work of dating is me figuring out, are you willing to work through issues? Mm-hmm. And when I bring my problems and you bring your problems, we're going to work together, or are you the problem?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say like, we just villainize every ex that doesn't work out. What I'm saying is for you to be in a relationship with them, it's not going to work.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, y'all said a lot. That was I'm trying to think like, man, where do we go next? I mean, y'all said so many things, and I think where something I personally would like to know is, especially when it comes to when you marry, right? You hear, okay, you become one flesh, you become one, you become this team, but you still are individuals. Like, you still have your own individual walk with God.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how do you manage when, say, quote unquote, at one point in your time in your relationship, you're both, on fire for God, going in the same pace, and y'all like, you see eye to eye, and then at one point somebody just dips, and you still going up, but do you slow down to help meet them, or how does that work when it comes to marriage? I think a lot of times when it comes to friendships, people are like, oh, you're not where I'm going, I'm just going to keep going. And if you catch up, you catch up. Yes. Or sometimes people say, hey, I'll raise your hand. If you can catch my hand, I'll pull you down. Or some people will take that chance. Okay, I'm going to slow down, come meet you where you are, and let's go.
Yeah.
Right. How do y'all handle that?
Are you saying mainly spiritually?
Spiritually, mostly.
Yeah. I feel like AJ and I are both people, we are both very strong individuals. And so I think in times when one of us is maybe falling behind, we don't stop. And not in a way where we're like, oh, we're just gonna leave you behind, but it's like, hey, I'm still going. Come on, get up. Like, we're not just gonna do that, And so I don't think it's really a thing where it's like, I don't really know if it would be healthy if someone's gonna I guess, like turn their faith or tone their
sure.
faith down in order to encourage their spouse. And maybe that would be encouraging to other people. But I feel like for AJ and I, we are typically encouraged by like, hey, like, be better. Like, I know that's not you. Like, come on. Like, I know what you are and who you are. So like, keep moving, you know, and not in a hateful way. I feel like that sounds kind of direct. But just in a way of like, we're not just going to sit and lay, you know?
Yeah. I think, and I've heard different from other people. I don't think it is like the way that Whitney and I do things is not the blueprint for your relationship.
No.
As I am, and maybe I'll change over time. I don't know, but I just, some people, and maybe this is like the Pinterest Christianity or the Instagram Christianity that I see, where you've got this like, I can't wait to do like coffee double dates Bible reading in the morning with my significant other or my spouse. And there are people that really, I'm not trying to make fun of that person, but what I'm saying is I think it becomes idolized somewhat. When I'm trying to spend time with the Lord, I want to get away.
Yeah.
I want to get away and I want to be in my own head, because I really feel like when I get before the Lord, he's got to deal with me about some things, and he wants to speak to me individually and all those kinds of things. Now, do we talk about those things? Of course we do. And I've heard of successful relationships that they read the Bible together at the same time. For us, I don't think it works as much.
Yeah.
And I could see potentially some things like in the coming years, like I would like for us to have a more developed prayer life together.
Yeah.
But we still pray, you know, like
Yeah.
it's still a part of our life and the rhythms. I just think that for me personally, because we're so strong-willed in that area too, I wouldn't want any like, I just know myself enough to say this about myself. I don't want Bible study with us to be about like, okay, but I found this really cool thing in this passage, and that's what this passage mean. And then her being like, no, I found this cool thing instead. Because the giftings that I've been given as well, like when I open up a Bible and God's just popping things off a page to me, like, dude, this is unbelievable. I don't want to ever put my wife in a position where I'm trying to pastor, teach, lead a Bible study. And that's just naturally difficult for me. It just is, because that's the space that I've kind of lived in for most of my life.
Yeah.
So like in my head, I'm like, in order for me to get what I really need from God, he's got to be able to deal with me.
Yeah.
And then I also like when Whitney can come to me later and say, hey, I was reading this passage and here's what God said. This was awesome. Or this is what I learned. Like that's encouraging. If we do it together, sometimes the way that we interact and operate, it's like,
it
I don't know if he's saying that. I don't
right. Well,
crazy.
I think because AJ and I are both very natural like leaders. Like we've both led in the church setting a lot, and so it does become like when you put too many leaders in a room and you're like, no, guys, we're just trying to discuss, and they're like, no, but I think it's this. I'm like, no, I think it's this, you know, and so I think that it just it's been better for us to just kind of do it that way.
And I think for some other people, it might work great. It might be beautiful. I just don't think that's what works for us.
Yeah.
That's good. And so to backtrack a little bit more, something y'all really touched on was the prerequisites y'all put beforehand.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any specific examples of what that work looks like? Maybe be mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, whatever you feel like that work for y'all. Sure. Granted, like I said, caveat, remember this, what works for them might not work for you in your relationship. Like that's not, like I said, it's not a blueprint. It's not a carbon copy. It's not going to copy and paste and it's going to be great.
Don't call your significant other and spouse right after listening to this. Like, give it some time.
Don't send them to this passive aggressively.
Think about
it. Not allowed.
Disclaimer, we're not your reason for your problems, all right?
Correct. And we're not going to fix them either. Mm-hmm. So sorry. I think the biggest one, I feel like you would say it too, is learning how to communicate. Because I can communicate with a friend one way, and I can't come home and communicate to him the same way. And it's the same thing in dating. Like, you can't treat them like a friend because they hopefully are not just a friend if y'all are dating. You know, like, I think just learning another person and, like, what things upset them and what things, you know, it's just so hard to learn another person. And so I feel like just taking the time of, like, understanding them and really, truly, Sheldon, stop. But understanding, like, deep down the things that like excite them and make them happy and things that they, you know, will receive well, and then also what they don't receive well, and learning not even just like, oh well, now I can't do that, but like, how do I, you know, whether A, encourage them to become better in that area, or B, maybe learn to like work around that if it's a past pain point, you know?
No, it's really good. I think that a lot of it is how we talk about relationships a lot, and especially in America. I mean, I think we kind of have this like you yourself are like the most important being in the world, and like you're perfect and all that kind of stuff. And so you'll notice when people typically get on social media and talk about past relationships, it's always the other person's fault. It's always them.
Yeah.
It couldn't be you. They're toxic. They do this to me, all this kind of stuff. And we don't get the full picture. But like as individuals, we are infinitely valuable to God. And we are profoundly broken. Like, we have to get away from this narrative that's like, I'm trying to find the perfect person.
Yeah. Good luck.
You'll mess it up. You're not perfect.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is like what we mean when we say the prerequisites of what it's like to get into a healthy marriage and a relationship is two people that are profoundly broken. And I mean major flaws. Nobody does not have major flaws about them. Are now like these two planets that are like crash course trying to make one, and that is a destructive and crazy process. And it gives off a lot of heat, and there's a lot of carnage and all that kind of stuff. If you can go through it and let God guide it, you get a beautiful thing at the end of it, where now you've gotten hopefully the best of both, and you're covering each other's weaknesses and all those kinds of things. But the thing is that if you think that you're going to find the perfect person, and you're not going to have to deal with conflict,
Good luck.
and you're not going to have hard conversations, then what you're telling me is that the only person you want to date is yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the truth is that they have a background, they have past experiences,
Yeah.
they've got a family of origin that's probably different than yours was,
Yeah.
a religious background that you might not share, all those kinds of things. And so for me to be naive enough to think, oh, well, that's just going to stacked. It's great. It's wild.
Yeah.
It is a lie. And I think
is.
it's been weaponized. Some of it is the messaging. We try to like, you know, hey, you're valuable. And a lot of people have been told the opposite. And so I get that. But I think Satan weaponizes that same language against us as if I'm the person on the, like, we all think it's The
prize.
Bachelor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get a pick. You're the prize.
Yeah.
That's a TV show.
Right. That's
What
not
this
reality.
is real life. And you suck and they suck. And we've got to figure out if we can work together to be better.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that we're not saying that like you need to go and I think some people might take this the complete up. You don't need to go and fight every day and have difficult conversations every day.
No.
This is the truth about humanity and God. God will bring those things to you.
Life will
you
bring
will
them to
have
you.
those opportunities.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't got to manufacture them.
No, you don't.
But I think what it is, and one of the biggest things that you have to get through is over ego. You have to get over it, and you have to find out specifically in conflict. Some of that work we're talking about is you have to know how you run away. Because everybody does in some way. I'm saying that I'm confrontational, but that doesn't mean I don't have places that I want to run and hide.
Yeah.
Everybody does. I have to know myself enough and let myself be known enough to then say, well, when you do this, I start to shut down. Or when I do this, it starts to get out of hand.
Yeah.
And so we need to cover each other. But that's the thing is like, if Whitney were to say to me, hey, I want to have difficult conversations, but I just shut down and I can't. And that's the end of the conversation. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? If the conversation is, hey, this is really difficult for me and I'm going to keep trying at this. And when you extend that invitation and you extend that hand, I'm going to really try to grab a hold of that.
Yeah.
You're not going to bat 1,000.
Yeah.
Right.
But if I'm with somebody that I'm trying to reach out and say, hey, I know this is difficult for you. Can we walk in this together? Can we wade into this messiness for a little bit? And they're like, you know what? I know I start to shut down, but as soon as I was able, as soon as I was ready, I got back in it. And now we're ready to do it.
Which, I mean, you know, as much as I've talked about that AJ and I are both very strong individuals and we're both leaders and we are also like, I literally hate confrontation.
Sure do.
I hate it. A million times I hate it. If I could never have to bring up hard things again for the rest of my life, I would be so ecstatic. It would be the best present ever. But that's not life and that's not reality. So if you've been listening to the podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, so I can't have confrontation, so it's not going to work. You're going to be fine. Don't worry. Just take a deep breath. Like, it's all right.
This is not right or wrong. Like if Whitney has been there when it's like maybe midnight and I'm in bed and there's something that's happened. And I'm like, I need to call him. Like, I need to get on a phone right now. You know what?
And I'm like,
are they home? I'm going to drive over. Because, like, the feeling of me having something against somebody or something, I just hate it. And so I'm like, dude, I got to get it out of me. So, like, she'll be there and be like, hey, babe, you need to go to bed.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that one of these things is better or worse all the time. It's just that, you know, I think that not many people are naturally bent the way I am. I think most people are probably closer to where you are. But listen, dude, I still got those things. I still need to be told, hey, not now, not today, not right now, not a good time.
Well, and that's what I as we're talking about, you know, conflict and, you know, communication, the biggest thing I feel like is if you don't have someone that is actively trying to like know the Lord and have the fruits of the Spirit, like if you have someone that's not going to be patient, it's not going to work. Like the amount of patience AJ has given me is immense, but also the amount of patience that I have given AJ is immense. Like we both needed that patience for different reasons, but like if you have someone that just wants it to be perfect now, it's not going to work. Like if you're just trying to force things to be better or force things to be perfect or force the conversation, it's not going to work. And so like if you don't have someone that isn't actively seeking the Lord, but you are, it's not going to work. Like you're just, there is no way that you are going to make that work in a way that's healthy. You can maybe make it work, but it's not going to be healthy. One of you is going to be put in positions that you shouldn't have to be, you know? And so I think that, you know, AJ and I could be good at communication all we want, but the second that we aren't loving and kind toward each other, or we aren't patient, or we aren't willing to have self-control when we want to say that one thing that we know is going to help us win the argument, but it's not right to say it, like, it's not going to work, you know? And so, like, that's the pride and the ego that AJ is talking about is, like, if you are worried about winning the argument, you've already lost. Like, you've already lost at the relationship. Like, that is not, if that is your goal, then your maturity level is not at a place where you're ready to have a good relationship. You are still a child. That's okay. That's a bar. But you are still a child. And children don't date unless their parents
sell them off.
Right? Unless they're, whoa.
Oh, yo.
Excuse me?
What did he
I was
say?
going to say unless their parents don't have rules for them. But, you know, like, that's why we don't let kids date, because we're like, listen, fam, like, you're not ready for that. You're not ready to be thrown into the deep end. And so, like, I think that's the biggest thing for me, especially we used to lead a lot of high schoolers at our old church. And, like, if you're not mature enough, like, don't date.
Nobody's making you.
No one is making you. Like, just give yourself a few years to, like, let your frontal lobe, you know, develop a little bit more. Just a little bit more. You know, give yourself 6 months even and see what the Lord can do with you by yourself. There's a reason that Paul says that maybe you shouldn't even be married. Like, maybe that's best for you, you know? And so, like, just if your maturity is not at a level where you're able to swallow your pride, then you're not ready for a relationship.
That's right. I mean, there's a spectrum. And then after this, I think we can get to some questions. I want to make sure we hit some of them. But if there's a spectrum of how you deal with conflict, and on one side is winning the argument, then the other side to me is calling your own fouls.
Right.
Yeah.
That I think is one of the ultimate marks on if you're maturing, if you're able to handle conflict well. I am less interested in coming away feeling like I got Whitney.
Yeah.
And maybe in the beginning there was more of that because as it is in the way that I do in my family, like we just formulate arguments. That's what we do. We just aim to go for the jugular, take your legs out from under you, done.
It's like a sport. Like
it's
in like a good way.
There's
like
a mental joust that we all really enjoy. But over time, it had to be something that I say when we talk about relationship a lot. I had to give her like the secrets on how to beat me.
Yeah.
And that, for one, takes me to be self-aware enough to know. But two, it looked a lot like me saying, hey, if I go too argumentative, and I'm not yelling, but if I get too like dissecting, I'm just trying to pick apart things because that's a tendency that I have, then you need to tell me. You don't need to try to prove me wrong, because in all likelihood, it's probably not going to go well for you. It's that you need to let me know that if I've hurt your feelings, you tell me that I hurt your feelings. You don't try to win the argument. Because if we're just trying to win an argument, I've been trained for most of my life to win this thing.
Right.
But if you can tell me, hey, you hurt my feelings, then
Right.
it helps me disengage and be, oh,
Right.
but that's
it
the
turns
thing.
off that side of your brain.
And so it also now at 7.5 years, if one of us says something out of line, guess what? We say, hey, I'm sorry, that was out of line.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said that.
We call it on
I knew
ourselves.
what that was,
Yeah.
and I knew it, and I was mad, I was frustrated, I had a long day at work, I was stressed, whatever it is. But until you are more concerned about calling your own fouls than being right, you're not ready.
Yeah.
All right, hit us with some of these.
I mean, as fast as I want to go, I'm like, okay, I'm processing. I'm like, oh yeah.
I know.
good stuff.
I'm just in
This
the
is good
best
stuff,
way.
yeah.
In the best way, we were given so many questions
Right.
that I was not expecting.
We have 33 questions on there. And we've
That people
answered-
have set us by this point.
Right, and we've answered. Well, y'all answered 2 from
Right.
being
Just talking about it.
but y'all answered probably like 40% of them
Right.
going forward, which is great.
So maybe
And
we'll have to have a part 2 with the rest of these. We'll see.
Maybe we're at 45 minutes already. Sheesh. And so this is to kind of switch gears a little bit. So this question is, it says the church talks a lot about submission for women, but not a lot for guys. As men, it seems counterculture to have the characteristic of being submissive. So what does that look like for you, AJ? That was directed right for you.
Dang, right at me. That's a great question. That's a great question. A lot of cultures and religious cultures have used that part of the verse and that part of the passage to justify a lot of, I think, belittlement and a lot of oppression. And maybe you're like, well, I don't know if it's that far. It was that far. Of women to make them feel less than or whatever. It's as if, and I know this because I went to a Houston Baptist school where a lot of what they're told is a lot of these same things, as if in a marriage, the man is spouse 1A and the wife is spouse 1B, as if there's like a tier or a hierarchy.
Like a hierarchy, yeah.
There is something to be said about authority and leadership, and we'll talk about that at some podcast, I'm sure. But I've heard it explained, and I think probably the most beautiful way, that other part of the passage asks us to die.
Right.
And so by all accounts, if you want to go by what the Lord has said in his scripture about the jobs we have to do respectively, the man is given the harder job. Like it is, wife, be submissive. And then in the same passage you get, and husbands in the same way also be submissive, laying your life down as Christ did for the church. So the whole passage, you go read it. But the job of the woman is, hey, you're going to love them well, right? Like I need to submit and all this kind of stuff. And we can talk about why respect and all those kinds of things might factor into that from even like a guy and girl perspective. But by all marks, the guy has the harder job. And I make that point not to say that women aren't expected to do hard things, but to overemphasize even the fact that we've probably got this so far wrong in a lot of ways. I'm called to die to myself. I'm called to lay down my life as Christ did for me. And what did we see Christ do except for elevate those around him? Their needs above mine. That's the picture of the cross.
Yeah.
Is I know what's best for me. He had no sin. He had no reason to be on that cross other than it's going to benefit these other people. And so when you talk about what does submission look like, I think that leadership can be submissive, and I think that leadership can be gentle, and I think that leadership can be loving and caring and all those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
we point, I think, male leadership a lot of times because maybe we've all had a dad at some point that was a little bit more domineering or authoritative. Not everybody's story is that way. Mine certainly isn't. But that's kind of the picture you get of like the old rugged dad that like sets the rules for the house and sets the tone, and that's what it is. As if we are pitting mom and dad against each other. And I think that's something that you really have to dig in about submission in that question. Is any time you feel like you put mom and dad or husband and wife against each other, that's the work of the enemy. He wants to destroy marriage because God
Yeah.
instituted it.
Yeah.
And so if you ever find yourself under a place where they're like, oh, men and women, husband and wife, you guys are in conflict. Instead of on a team, you're listening to the wrong message.
Correct.
So when it comes down to submission for myself, and what does that look like I think in a lot of ways, like I said, not even just calling my own fouls, I think it's a lot of self-control. I think it's a lot of self-control. And I think that's what a majority of it is. Just because I feel hurt or I've been offended or all that kind of stuff does not give me the right to then go and to treat somebody the way that I think they deserve to be treated. Or if Whitney wounds me and hurts me, I think some of what Jesus displays the most self-control in going to the cross is, you know what? Not only am I going to forgive, and it's not like Whitney doesn't have to forgive me for those things, but specifically me, it's about saying, I could be petty. I could do these things. I could wound you back, but I'm supposed to die to myself. And that is serving the opposite intention. At that time, I'm trying to get what I want. My job is to then lay myself down and say, boom, I'm not here to win. I'm not here to do that. I think that there's a quote that sums it up a lot too. Is any king that has to call himself a king is no king at all. Right. If I have to go and tell my wife, and I've got to tell everybody that'll listen, I'm the man of this house and I run things and I do it. No, you don't. Why are you trying to convince all of us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you see that, I feel like, in those typical relationships that you're talking about where, you know, you have this very authoritative male figure. When you go to their house and it's not like, you know, everyone's watching, you know, like when you went to your friend's house and then like you kind of saw the behind the scenes of the sleepover and it's like, wait, the dad is just sitting on the couch watching the football game and the mom's literally calling every shot there ever was. Yeah. Like any question that was asked, nobody has dad. You know, they're not going to their dad. They're like, hey, mom, what's for dinner? Hey, mom, what are we doing tomorrow? Hey, mom, what are we wearing on Easter Sunday to church? Hey, mom, you know, like the man isn't even calling the shots. He's just focused on the image of that. And so I feel like in marriage, I mean, AJ and I have had extensive conversations about male's role and female's role and even outside of just husbands and wives, but how males and females interact in the church and how they should interact in society. And, you know, we've had a lot of really deep conversations and I feel like, yeah, I mean, AJ hit the nail on the head when he's talking about, you know, in the same breath of them telling the wives to submit to husbands, they literally say, and husbands submit to your wives. Right. Like, it isn't supposed to be as divisive as people have used it to be. And so, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these things, right, as any other scripture, they happen in context. And so the author is not just being, and as a side note, all wives need to be submissive, as if it doesn't have anything to do with what they're talking about.
Right.
And that's how we lift scripture out and we say, oh, see, he made this point. It's like, okay, but what's the whole passage? So this is Ephesians 5. Because we're talking so much about it, I just figured we should get the actual quote. Right. This is under passage Ephesians 5, starting in verse 21. And so we've talked about up until this point in this passage about a lot more relationships than just husband and wife, but that's where I'm picking up. And further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husband as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of his wife as Christ is the head of the church. He is the savior of his body, the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands in everything. For husbands, this means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her, to make her holy and clean and washed by the cleansing of God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church, and we are members of his body. As the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So again I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So in context, a lot more is said about the man.
Yeah.
A lot more. And I'm not trying to paint this picture that like one person bears the blame here or the weight. Like both people bear the weight of the relationship. But when it comes down to what that passage is saying, I mean, imagine as a husband, me reading that and getting from that, you need to agree with what I say.
Yeah.
Like, bro.
Like, we're not even talking about relationship dynamics. That is just awful interpretation skills. You just don't know how to read the Bible.
Right.
And like, if you haven't been taught, then you haven't been taught. But like, a lot of people who have been taught need to be taught. So when it comes down to it, I think you have to look at the picture that you get of Christ is the suffering servant while he is on earth and what he does for the church. And the way that it talks about it, you be gentle, you love, you are compassionate. And so that means that, like, when Whitney's having a hard day, I don't come home and I say, you need to get it together because this place needs to get picked up, as some people might. I say, can I help? What's going on? How was your day? Because here's the deal. As it comes down to it, Whitney doesn't need the same things that I need. Okay? We're different, and God built us that way. So Whitney does not need me to come and solve her problems, right? She does need an ear so that she can talk and feel known. And this is a trend that you'd see across a majority of guys and girls. I don't need Whitney to come and to solve my issues, right? Like, I don't come home and be like, Whitney, will you do this for me? You know, like, we're always trying to help each other out, but there comes a point where I have to understand too, what my wife needs is not, as guys, I think that we think everybody needs a coach to talk to us, like our coach talked to us. Well, that's what really helped me, was when somebody told me, hey, you need to get it together and you need to be a man. And you blah, blah, blah. And sometimes that's helpful. There's a time and place for that, man. But like, not everybody needs that. That's what you needed in that context. So I have to figure out when I get home, hey, when my wife's had a bad day and all I want to do is lay on the couch and I don't want to do anything for the rest of the night, and I've dealt with a lot of people, or my boss was acting a certain way, or I got a text, or all that kind of stuff. The thing is that when I get home, I have a calling on my life now to make sure whatever she needs, she gets it first. Does that mean I do it perfectly? Of course not. But like, this was some of the curse, and we're not going to get all the way into it, but some of the curse in the garden of men becoming passive.
Yeah.
And women desiring control in a domineering way, in an unhealthy way. And that's why you see a lot of the situations that Whitney described, where you get the wife who's and the guy, the husband who's just sitting on the couch. Yeah. Might as well not even be there. When it comes down to it, I think it's just a good rule for anybody, right? Like, treat other people as more important than you. That's what the Bible says. Like, love people sacrificially, all those kinds of things. And so a lot of times it's like, it just means that I don't get what I want all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, we could have a whole conversation about that and what are the intricacies and how does that look and from a day to day. But like, man, if you love your wife the way that Christ loves the church and the way that you love yourself, I try to tend to the needs that I have for me. When I'm thirsty, I get water, you know, all those kinds of things. Like, I take care of myself. And then when I am husband, it's saying, hey, by the way, you're also one as well. I'm just taking care of her first. Mm-hmm. That's my goal today. But
yeah, well, and two, I mean, as long as we're talking about a healthy marriage relationship, if you are doing your job that passage is talking about, your wife is going to want to submit to you. You won't have to bring it up. Like, it won't have to be like a question. Like, if, like, that's the way the Bible is designed, is that like when you are following what it says, the things that it says that follows will follow, you know? And so like, the more that AJ, you know, is serving me and checking on me and laying down his life to make sure that, you know, I'm getting what I need and I'm okay, it makes it easy when those things come up that maybe we aren't we're disagreeing on something that I'm like, you know what, like, okay, like, it's okay. Like, we'll figure it out. And like, I don't have to seek that control because I know that he's looking out for me. Like, he's not my enemy. Yeah. You know, he's looking out for my good. And so it makes those times when submission, in the way that they're actually using that word, or the way that I guess people have used that word, it makes that submission easy. You know, it makes the like, okay, like, I'll throw my hands up. Like, if you really think that's what we're supposed to do, like, I'll do it, because I know that he's not after his own good. He's looking out for me more than himself.
To my knowledge, I don't think I've ever said to you,
you need to submit.
hey, I'm the man.
No.
And so you need to get in line.
No.
I've never had to use that.
If
and
you
I'm not
had,
going to.
we wouldn't have been married.
And so a lot of what that comes down to is this idea of what Whitney's saying is, because I've led the way that I have, she can trust my leadership and she can buy into those things.
Yeah. If you're having to ask your wife to submit, it's probably because you're a bad leader.
Yeah. And what is,
That's
I
probably
think
the issue.
Tim Ross has a great point on this, shout out. But his point being, like, I think a lot of one of the things you can bring from that context is, like, Christ is God, but in the circumstance, he lowers himself. In the same way, Tim Ross has this point about it, that, like, you're not the boss of a church when you go home. You're not executive pastor. You're the husband, and that means you need to go do some dishes. She does not care who you are outside of that, because to her, in that relationship, you are the husband and she is the wife, and you're not executive, you're not boss, and maybe you've been around your staff all day, and so it's different there. But you need to know when you get home, that dynamic is no longer the same.
Yeah.
Now it's, nope, us together on the same team. And so as much as I would, this is what I was saying when I was like, I don't need quite the same. Like, Whitney will go and visit her family every now and then, and because she's just really a family-oriented person, and it's great for her. It's really good for her mental health.
And they live far away, so
And
I
they
have
live
to
far
travel
away, and
to
so
go and
it's
see
a
them.
commitment to go and to do it. I don't need her to check in on me. Like, it's appreciated, but, like, I'm gonna be good. Honestly, it's probably scary how long Whitney could go before she's like, I don't know, it's been a month. Maybe I should check in and make sure my husband's alive.
Because he would not, if
I'll
it was
keep
up to
myself
him,
entertained.
he would never check.
I'll figure
check
it out. I'm good on my own. A lot of times you get this dynamic. One person is like, they want that, and the other person's like, meh, I'm the man. I'm just like, it's okay. I know that you're coming back. Like, I'm secure in the fact that you're going to come back. And so I'm not worried about it. And I just use my time. Like, Whitney's like, hey, I'm going out of town. I'm like, oh, okay, let me go meet with these people that I was trying to meet with, and blah, 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 blah. I take care of it.
Yeah.
You know? So that means that on most days when I come home, what I really need is not much. Like, I'm just going to sit there and kind of keep myself entertained and all. If it's just me on a day-to-day basis, what I want and need all the time. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to hang out with Whitney, but I'm saying when it comes to, like, bare needs of what we both need, they're different. Whitney does need an interaction in a way that I don't. She does need me to show interest in those kinds of things and talk about her days and all that kind of stuff. And Whitney will tell you, she's like, I've tried for years at this point to get AJ to tell me what happened in his day. And I'm like, listen, if something different happens, I'll let you know. But, like, up until this point, it's the same as it always is, you know? When something different happens, I come home and I'm like, hey, this happened today.
Yeah, because of this, I honestly don't think I could fully tell you what his job is. No clue.
So that's the thing, you know?
I know, like maybe he uses test tubes and cleans things. That's about all I've got.
It's about understanding needs, you know? Like, if I treated her the way I needed in that moment, then I would not be addressing what really needed to happen. So it's just about understanding, like, even though I don't need some of the things that she does. And that matters. And that's my priority. And so I have to go and watch her back. And in the same way, she's trying to meet my needs. It's just, it's a wonderful back and forth, a wonderful dance of people trying to love each other better and love each other more. Like, and if you've got to come in there and throw down your king ring and staff and be like, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to be honest with you. You're not going to like what you build.
Yeah.
Like, let's forget about anybody else. You're going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Because you're going to think everybody's out to get you, and you need to watch out for you. And that is a miserable way to live your life.
I think that's a good way to honestly end the episode. I mean, y'all have said a lot of good things, and just from sitting here listening, I always listen to y'all talk because y'all just so wise. I have so many great things to say. But from what I deduced as, okay, like, what are some success things that you can be doing right now, or what are the things you need to have in order first before you even, consider getting to that space? And like, one of the things that, I mean, you always hear this, but to hear it again is kind of get reinforced. It's like, going back to the submission thing, right? What you hear a lot of times, like y'all said, is like, oh, well, I'm the man, you're the woman. The Bible says submit, so you submit. like think, are you a man worth submitting to?
That's right.
Yeah.
And then going way back, Whitney was saying about not being yoked correctly.
Yeah.
Like if I'm the man not submitting myself to Christ and she, the woman, is not submitting herself to Christ, we're both gonna be out of line somewhere, and it's gonna be a huge issue.
Yep.
And if you're not gonna talk about it, you're just gonna dance around it. And then I think people get to that space where they do get married, and all of a sudden, like, whoa, you're not who I thought you were. You lied to me. You deceived me.
Yeah.
You played me. But you both ignored everything that led up to that point.
Right.
And so I think going in at a third piece level to that is having that self-awareness to call your own fouls, to know where you went wrong, and being able to say, hey, forgive me for that. I was wrong. I did this wrong. And then to move forward from that. And then the last thing I want to touch on is when it comes to communication, we can communicate really well all day, like you're saying. But if the other person is not comprehending what I'm saying, am I really communicating well?
Yeah.
Right? That's a valid question. And at the same time, on the flip end of that, yes, I could be communicating very well, and you should be able to comprehend it, but what is blocking you from understanding what I'm trying to tell you?
Right.
And so I think it all plays into that, okay, what do I think is true? What is true? And how should I respond to that? And I mean, that's basic Christianity at the end of the day, right? The Bible says it's true. Do I believe it? Do I not? If I believe it, I move a certain way. If I don't believe it, guess what? I move the opposite way.
Yeah.
And so taking all those things into account, I mean, I definitely want a part two. There's so many more questions that we didn't get to answer. We really only answered 4 questions, which is good conversation. And so
That's what we want.
yeah, and I just want to thank Whitney again for coming on the pod.
100%.
And we will be
Anytime.
seeing you again for part 2.
For sure.
Do part 3? Who knows? I don't know. It's our house. So
We might have to, man.
We're gonna do what she wants. And so, you have anything else, bro?
No, I mean, I think that one of the things that I want people who aren't married to hear, like, if you hear kind of some of the things that we talk about and say you want that for yourself, you're signing up for a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I know that it's easy for us to kind of just talk about them now that we've lived them, and we touched on some of that. But like, I know that there's plenty of people that are kind of in this space where I don't even know who I'm supposed to be with. There's nobody on my horizon. I've got nobody around me. How could I be getting ready? Because there is truth. There's so many things that only our relationship could have brought out of us.
Right.
I could not have chosen to work on it beforehand because I didn't know it was there.
Ooh, that speaks.
So
Part 2.
I think that this is, we'll get into it more in a part 2, but one of the things I want to let you know is work on what you already know about yourself,
Yeah.
because you're broken in ways you don't know.
Yeah.
And so to be kind to yourself and to your potential spouse one day, get a head start. Like,
Yeah. Well, and look at your friendships. Like, if you're not in a relationship, but you know that you have only a few friends, but you aren't close with any of them,
yep.
ask yourself why.
Yep.
Ask those people why. Hey, why are we not close? Figure those things out, because the more that you work on just being a good friend, the better you will be when or if that relationship ever comes around. Because, I mean, it sounds so cheesy and corny, but like at the end of the day, like, AJ's my best friend. Like, he is. He's my best friend, you know? And so like we are good spouses to each other, but like we're also just good friends to each other,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it is. And I think that you have to understand, like, what Whitney's saying is ask for feedback from places around you. And if that scares you, that's a great place to start. Why does feedback from other people freak me out?
Yeah.
Because guess what? Marriage is a lot of feedback. It's a lot of, you do that. Why do you do that? Or, we're not going to do that anymore. That's how you've handled things. That's not how we're going to handle them anymore.
Yeah.
And so there are ways that we are broken. Just to make it as like easy to understand as possible, there might be some like deep, like even to get on the level of trauma. We're not going to dive into this right now, but there are things that happens with trauma where you might not even be able to access those certain things, right? So let's not pretend that you're going to somehow do enough work to get past those hurdles. Those things will come up when they come up. But if, let's say, you've got repressed trauma and you also have present anger issues, I am not spending a lot of my time trying to find out what I don't know about myself. I'm going to go for the thing that is pretty blatant and obvious. Oh, I have anger issues. Why don't I try to tackle that? God, why do I have anger issues? People around me, why? How have I responded? How have you felt? All that kind of stuff. If you can just build that muscle of communicating and getting feedback and taking that and processing it and allowing yourself to change, that's the same muscle that you use in marriage. It doesn't mean it's always going to translate 1-to-1, but the point is that we all are so broken. I cannot emphasize it enough. There are things about you that you know you could be working on. So work on them. And then the things that you don't know that are in there, right? See Peter denying Christ 3 times. He didn't know that was in there. But guess what? His opportunity was when it came up. And so if you want to be able to handle what you don't know, I would get started on what you do know.
And I think that is a great way to end it. This has been Lessons and Blessings. We will have a part 2. We don't know when.
Who knows?
But we will let y'all know. And again, thank you for everybody who sent in questions. And definitely, if you have anything else, please send it in.
Yeah, send
them.
And if your things didn't get answered, still, again, appreciate you for.
We have them. We have them.
Yes.
We have a list. So I want this thing to go to 100.
No.
Don't do that.
I mean, we're
Well,
going to be doing this for a long time.
If you want to.
Yeah,
We're gonna be doing this for a long time.
Right. And so, yeah, this has been Lessons and Blessings. It's Sheldon.
AJ.
This was Whit.
And I'm going to see y'all on the flip. Peace.
Peace.